Chapter 26 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 26. How the three comrades gained a mighty treasure. It was a bright, crisp winter's day when the little party set off from Bordeaux on their journey to Montauban, where the missing half of their company had last been heard of. Sir Nigel and Ford had ridden on in advance, the knight upon his hackney, while his great war horse trotted beside his squire. 2 hours later Alleyn Edricson followed, for he had the tavern reckoning to settle and many other duties which fell to him as the squire of the body. With him came Aylward and Hordle John, armed as of old, but mounted for their journey upon a pair of clumsy Landes horses, heavy headed and shambling, but of great endurance, and capable of jogging along all day, even when between the knees of the huge archer, who turned the scale at 270 pounds. They took with them the sumpter mules, which carried in panniers the wardrobe and table furniture of Sir Nigel; for the knight, though neither fop nor epicure, was very dainty in small matters, and loved, however bare the board or hard the life, that his napery should still be white and his spoon of silver. There had been frost during the night, and the white hard road rang loud under their horses' irons as they spurred through the east gate of the town, along the same broad highway which the unknown French champion had traversed on the day of the jousts. The three rode abreast, Alleyn Edricson with his eyes cast down and his mind distraught, for his thoughts were busy with the conversation which he had had with Sir Nigel in the morning. Had he done well to say so much, or had he not done better to have said more? What would the knight have said if he had confessed to him his love for the Lady Maude? Would he have cast him off in disgrace, or might he chide him as having abused the shelter of his roof? It had been ready upon his tongue to tell him all when Sir Oliver had broken in upon them. Perchance Sir Nigel, with his love of all the dying usages of chivalry, might have contrived some strange ordeal or feat of arms by which his love should be put to the test. Alleyne smiled as he wondered what fantastic and wondrous deed would be extracted from him. Whatever it was, he was ready for it, whether it were to hold the lists in the court of the King of Tartary, to carry a cartel to the Sultan of Baghdad, or to serve a term against the wild heathen of Prussia. Sir Nigel had said that his birth was high enough for any lady if his fortune could but be amended. Often had Alleyne curled his lip at the beggarly craving for land or for gold which blinded man to the higher and more lasting issues of life. Now it seemed as though it were only by this same land and gold that he might hope to reach his heart's desire. But then again the Socman of Minstead was no friend to the Constable of Twynham Castle. It might happen that, should he amass riches by some happy fortune of war, this feud might hold the two families aloof. Even if Maude loved him, he knew her too well to think that she would wed him without the blessing of her father. Dark and murky was it all, but hope mounts high in youth, and it ever fluttered over all the turmoil of his thoughts like a white plume amid the shock of horsemen. If Alleyn Edricson had enough to ponder over as he rode through the bare plains of Guienne, his two companions were more busy with the present and less thoughtful of the future. Aylward rode for half a mile with his chin upon his shoulder, looking back at a white kerchief which fluttered out of the gable window of a high house which peeped over the corner of the battlements. When at last a dip of the road hid it from his view, he cocked his steel cap, shrugged his broad shoulders, and rode on with laughter in his eyes and his weather beaten face all ashine with pleasant memories. John also rode in silence, but his eyes wandered slowly from one side of the road to the other, and he stared and pondered and nodded his head like a traveller who makes his notes and saves them up for the retelling. "By the rood!" he broke out suddenly, slapping his thigh with his great red hand, "I knew that there was something amissing, but I could not bring my mind to what it was." "Oh, what was it then?" asked Alleyne, coming with a start out of his reverie.
"Why, it is the hedgerows!" roared John with a shout of laughter. The country is all scraped as clear as a friar's poll. But indeed I cannot think much of the folk in these parts. Why do they not get to work and dig up these long rows of black and crooked stumps which I see on every hand? Our Franklin of Hampshire would think shame to have such litter upon his soil." "Thou foolish old John," quoth Aylward. "You should know better, since I have heard that the monks of Beaulieu could squeeze a good cup of wine from their own grapes. Know then that if these rows were dug up the wealth of the country would be gone, and mayhap there would be dry throats and gaping mouths in England, for in 3 months' time these black roots will blossom and snoot and burgeon, and from them will come many a good shipload of Medoc and Gascony which will cross the narrow seas. But see the church in the hollow, and the folk who cluster in the churchyard. By my hilt, it is a burial, and there is a passing bell." He pulled off his steel cap as he spoke, and crossed himself with a muttered prayer for the repose of the dead. "There too," remarked Alleyne, as they rode on again, "that which seems to the eye to be dead is still full of the sap of life, even as the vines were. Thus God hath written himself in his laws very broadly on all that is around us, if our poor dull eyes and duller souls could but read what he hath set before us." "Ah, mon petit," cried the bowman, "you take me back to the days when you were new fledged and sweet a little chick as ever pecked his way out of a monkish egg. I had feared that in gaining our debonair young man at arms we had lost our soft spoken clerk. In truth, I have noticed much change in you since we came from Twynham Castle."
"Surely it would be strange else, seeing that I have lived in a world so new to me. Yet I trust that there are many things in which I have not changed. If I have turned to serve an earthly master, and to carry arms for an earthly king, it would be an ill thing if I were to lose all thought of the great high King and master of all, whose humble and unworthy servant I was ere ever I left Beaulieu. You, John, are also from the cloisters, but I trow that you do not feel that you have deserted the old service in taking on the new."
"I am a slow witted man," said John, "and in sooth, when I try to think about such matters it casts a gloom upon me. Yet I do not look upon myself as a worse man in an archer's jerkin than I was in a white cowl, if that be what you mean." "You have but changed from one white company to the other," quoth Aylward. "But by these 10 finger bones, it is a passing strange thing to me to think that it was but in the last fall of leaf that we walked from Lyndhurst together, he so gentle and maidenly, and you, John, like a great red limbed overgrown moon calf. And now here you are as sprack a squire and as lusty an archer as ever passed down the highway from Bordeaux, while I am still the same old Samkin Aylward, with never a change, save that I have a few more sins on my soul and a few less crowns in my pouch. But I have never yet heard, John, what the reason was why you should come out of Beaulieu." "There were 7 reasons," said John thoughtfully. "The first of them was that they threw me out." "Ma foi, camarade, to the devil with the other 6. That is enough for me and for thee also. I can see that they are very wise and discreet folk at Beaulieu. Ah, mon ange, what have you in the pipkin?"
"It is milk, worthy sir," answered the peasant maid, who stood by the door of a cottage with a jug in her hand. "Would it please you, gentles, that I should bring you out 3 horns of it?"
"Nay, ma petite, but here is a 2 sous piece for thy kindly tongue and for the sight of thy pretty face." "Ma foi, but she has a bonne mine. I have a mind to bide and speak with her."
"Nay, nay, Aylward," cried Alleyne. "Sir Nigel will await us, and he in haste."
"True, true, camarade. Adieu, ma chérie. Ma cour est toujours à toi." Her mother is a well grown woman also. See where she digs by the wayside. Ma foi, the riper fruit is ever the sweeter. Bonjour, ma belle dame. God have you in his keeping. Said Sir Nigel where he would await us?
"At Marmont or Aiguillon. He said that we could not pass him, seeing that there is but the one road."
"Aye, and it is a road that I know as I know the Midhurst parish butts," quoth the bowman. 30 times have I journeyed it forward and backward, and by the twang of string I am wont to come back this way more laden than I went. I have carried all that I had into France in a wallet, and it hath taken 4 sumpter mules to carry it back again. God's benison on the man who first turned his hand to the making of war. But there, down in the dingle, is the church of Cardillac, and you may see the inn where 3 poplars grow beyond the village. Let us on, for a stoup of wine would hearten us upon our way."
The highway had lain through the swelling vineyard country, which stretched away to the north and east in gentle curves, with many a peeping spire and feudal tower and cluster of village houses, all clear cut and hard in the bright wintry air. To their right stretched the blue Garonne, running swiftly seawards, with boats and barges dotted over its broad bosom. On the other side lay a strip of vineyard, and beyond it the desolate and sandy region of the Landes, all tangled with faded gorse and heath and broom, stretching away in unbroken gloom to the blue hills which lay low upon the furthest skyline. Beyond them might still be seen the broad estuary of the Gironde, with the high towers of Saint Andre and Saint Remy shooting up from the plain. In front, amid the radiating lines of poplars, lay the riverside townlet of Cardillac, grey walls, white houses, and a feather of blue smoke.
"This is the Mouton d'Or,"
said Aylward, as they pulled up their horses at a whitewashed straggling hostel.
"What ho there!"
he continued, beating upon the door with the hilt of his sword.
"Tapster, ostler, varlet, hark hither! Wanning on your lazy limbs. Ah, Michel, as red in the nose as ever. 3 jacks of the wine of the country, Michel, for the air bites shrewdly. I pray you, Alleyne, to take note of this door, for I have a tale concerning it."
"Tell me, friend," said Alleyne to the portly, red faced innkeeper. "Has a knight and a squire passed this way within the hour?" "Nay, sir, it would be 2 hours back." "Was he a small man, weak in the eyes, with a want of hair, and speaks very quiet when he is most to be feared?" "The same," the squire answered. "But I marvel how you should know how he speaks when he is in wrath, for he is very gentle minded with those who are beneath him." "Praise to the saints! It was not I who angered him," said the fat Michel. "Who then?" "It was young Sieur de Crespigny of Saintonge, who chanced to be here, and made game of the Englishman, seeing he was but a small man and hath a face which is full of peace. But indeed this good knight was a very quiet and patient man, for he saw that the Sieur de Crespigny was still young and spoke from an empty head. So he sat his horse and quaffed his wine, even as you are doing now, all heedless of the clacking tongue." "And what then, Michel?"
"Well, messieurs, it chanced that the Sieur de Crespigny, having said this and that, for the laughter of the varlets, cried out at last about the glove that the knight wore in his coif, asking if it was the custom in England for a man to wear a great archer's glove in his cap. Pardieu, I have never seen a man get off his horse as quick as did the stranger Englishman. Ere the words were past the other's lips he was beside him, his face nigh touching and his breath hot upon his cheek. 'I think, young sir,' quoth he softly, looking into the other's eyes, 'that now that I am nearer you will very clearly see that the glove is not an archer's glove.' 'Perchance not,' said the Sieur de Crespigny with a twitching lip. 'Nor is it large, but very small,' quoth the Englishman. 'Less large than I had thought,' said the other, looking down, for the knight's gaze was heavy upon his eyelids. 'And in every way such a glove as might be worn by the fairest and sweetest lady in England,' quoth the Englishman. 'It may be so,' said the Sieur de Crespigny, turning his face from him. 'I am myself weak in the eyes, and have often taken one thing for another,' quoth the knight, as he sprang back into his saddle and rode off, leaving the Sieur de Crespigny biting his nails before the door. "By the 5 wounds, many men of war have drunk my wine, but never one was more to my fancy than this little Englishman." "By my hilt, he is our master, Michel," quoth Aylward, "and such men as we do not serve under a laggard. But here are 4 deniers, Michel, and God be with you. En avant, comrade, for we have a long road before us." At a brisk trot the 3 friends left Cardillac and its wine house behind them, riding without a halt past Saint Macaire, and on by ferry over the river Dorte. At the further side the road winds through La Réole, Bazaille, and Marmande, with the sunlit river still gleaming upon the right,
and the bare poplars bristling up on either side. John and Alleyne rode silent on either side, but every inn, farmsteading, or castle brought back to Aylward some remembrance of love, foray, or plunder with which to beguile the way.
"There is the smoke from Bazas on the farther side of the Garonne," quoth he. "There were 3 sisters yonder, the daughters of a farrier, and by these 10 finger bones a man might ride for a long June day and never set eyes upon such maidens. There was Marie, tall and grave, and Blanche, petite and gay, and the dark Agne, with eyes that went through like a waxed arrow. I lingered there as long as 4 days, and was betrothed to them all, for it seemed shame to set one above her sisters, and might make ill blood in the family. Yet for all my care things were not merry in the house, and I thought it well to come away. Oh, there too is the mill of La Souris. Old Pierre Le Caron, who owned it, was a right good comrade, and had ever a seat and a crust for a weary archer. He was a man who wrought hard at all that he turned his hand to, but he heated himself in grinding bones to mix with his flour, and so through over diligence he brought a fever upon himself and died."
"Tell me, Aylward," said Alleyne, "what was amiss with the door of yonder inn that you should ask me to observe it?"
"Pardieu, yes, I had well nigh forgot. What saw you on yonder door?"
"I saw a square hole, through which doubtless the host may peep when he is not too sure of those who knock."
"And saw you naught else?"
"I marked that beneath this hole there was a deep cut in the door, as though a great nail had been driven in."
"And naught else?"
"No."
"Had you looked more closely you might have seen that there was a stain upon the wood. The first time that I ever heard my comrade Black Simon laugh was in front of that door. I heard him once again when he slew a French squire with his teeth, he being unarmed and the Frenchman having a dagger." "Why did Simon laugh in front of the inn door?" asked John. "Simon is a hard and perilous man when he hath a bitter drop in him. By my hilt, he was born for war, for there is little sweetness or rest in him. This inn, the Mouton d'Or, was kept in the old days by one Francois Gourval, who had a hard fist and a harder heart. It was said that many and many an archer coming from the wars had been served with wine with simples in it until he slept, and had then been stripped of all by this Gourval. Then on the morrow, if he made complaint, this wicked Gourval would throw him out upon the road or beat him, for he was a very lusty man and had many stout varlets in his service. This chanced to come to Simon's ears when we were in Bordeaux together, and he would have it that we should ride to Cardillac with a good hempen cord and give this Gourval such a scourging as he merited. Forth we rode then, but when we came to the Mouton d'Or, Gourval had had word of our coming and its purpose, so that the door was barred, nor was there any way into the house. 'Let us in, good Master Gourval,' cried Simon, and 'Let us in, good Master Gourval,' cried I. But no word could we get through the hole of the door, save that he would draw an arrow upon us unless we went on our way. 'Well, Master Gourval,' quoth Simon at last, 'this is but a sorry welcome, seeing that we have ridden so far just to shake you by the hand.' 'Canst shake me by the hand without coming in,' said Gourval. 'And how that?' asked Simon. 'By passing in your hand through the hole,' said he. 'Nay, my hand is wounded,' quoth Simon, 'and of such a size that I cannot pass it in.' 'That need not hinder,' said Gourval, who was hot to be rid of us. 'Pass in your left hand.' 'But I have something for thee, Gourval,' said Simon. 'What then?' he asked. 'There was an English archer who slept here last week, of the name of Hugh of Nutbourne.' 'We have had many rogues here,' said Gourval. 'His conscience hath been heavy within him, because he owes you a debt of 14 deniers, having drunk wine for which he hath never paid. For the easing of his soul he asked me to pay the money to you as I passed. Now, this Gourval was very greedy for money, so he thrust forth his hand for the 14 deniers, but Simon had his dagger ready, and he pinned his hand to the door. 'I have paid the Englishman's debt, Gourval,' quoth he, and so rode away, laughing so that he could scarcely sit his horse, leaving mine host still nailed to his door. Such is the story of the hole which you have marked, and of the smudge upon the wood. I have heard that from that time English archers have been better treated in the auberge of Cardillac. But what have we here by the wayside?"
"It appears to be a very holy man," said Alleyne.
"And by the rood he hath some strange wares," cried John. "What are these bits of stone and of wood and rusted nails which are set out in front of him?"
The man whom they had remarked sat with his back against a cherry tree, with his legs shooting out in front of him, like one who is greatly at his ease. Across his thighs was a wooden board, and scattered over it all manner of slips of wood and knobs of brick and stone, each laid separate from the other, as a huckster places his wares. He was dressed in a long gray gown, and wore a broad hat of the same color, much weather stained, with 3 scallop shells dangling from the brim. As they approached, the travellers observed that he was advanced in years, and that his eyes were upturned and yellow. "Dear knights and gentlemen," he cried in a high crackling voice, "worthy Christian cavaliers, will ye ride past and leave an aged pilgrim to die of hunger? The sight has been burned from my eyes by the sands of the Holy Land, and I have had neither crust of bread nor cup of wine these 2 days past."
"By my hilt, father," said Aylward, looking keenly at him, "it is a marvel to me that thy girdle should have so goodly a span and clip thee so closely, if you have in sooth had so little to place within it."
"Kind stranger," answered the pilgrim, "you have unwittingly spoken words which are very grievous to me to listen to. Yet I should be loath to blame you, for I doubt not that what you said was not meant to sadden me, nor bring my sore affliction back to my mind. It ill becomes me to prate too much of what I have endured for the faith, and yet, since you have observed it, I must tell you that this thickness and roundness of the waist is caused by a dropsy brought on by over haste in journeying from the house of Pilate to the Mount of Olives."
"There, Aylward," said Alleyne, with a reddened cheek, "let that curb your blunt tongue.
How could you bring a fresh pang to this holy man, who hath endured so much and hath journeyed as far as Christ's own blessed tomb?"
"May the foul fiend strike me dumb!"
cried the bowman in hot repentance, but both the palmer and Alleyne threw up their hands to stop him.
"I forgive thee from my heart, dear brother," piped the blind man. "But oh, these wild words of thine are worse to mine ears than aught which you could say of me."
"Not another word shall I speak," said Aylward. "But here is a franc for thee, and I crave thy blessing."
"And here is another," said Alleyne.
"And another," cried Hordle John.
But the blind palmer would have none of their alms.
"Foolish, foolish pride!"
he cried, beating upon his chest with his large brown hand.
"Foolish, foolish pride! How long then will it be ere I can scourge it forth? Am I then never to conquer it? Oh, strong, strong are the ties of flesh, and hard it is to subdue the spirit. I come, friends, of a noble house, and I cannot bring myself to touch this money, even though it be to save me from the grave."
"Alas, father," said Alleyne, "how then can we be of help to thee?"
"I had sat down here to die," quoth the palmer, "but for many years I have carried in my wallet these precious things which you see set forth now before me. It was sin, thought I, that my secret should perish with me. I shall therefore sell these things to the first worthy passers by, and from them I shall have the money enough to take me to the shrine of Our Lady of Rocamadour, where I hope to lay these old bones."
"What are these treasures then, father?" asked Hordle John. "I can but see an old rusty nail with bits of stone and slips of wood."
"My friend," answered the palmer, "not all the money that is in this country could pay a just price for these wares of mine. This nail," he continued, pulling off his hat and turning up his sightless orbs, "is one of those wherewith man's salvation was secured. I had it, together with this piece of the true rood, from the 25th descendant of Joseph of Arimathea, who still lives in Jerusalem, alive and well, though latterly much afflicted by boils. Aye, you may well cross yourselves, and I beg that you will not breathe upon it or touch it with your fingers." "And the wood and stone, holy father?" asked Alleyne, with bated breath, as he stared awestruck at his precious relics. "This cantle of wood is from the true cross, this other from Noah his ark, and the third is from the doorpost of the temple of the wise King Solomon. This stone was thrown at the sainted Stephen, and the other two are from the Tower of Babel. Here, too, is part of Aaron's rod, and a lock of hair from Elisha the prophet." "But, father," quoth Alleyne, "the holy Elisha was bald, which brought down upon him the revilements of the wicked children." "It is very true that he had not much hair," said the palmer quickly, "and it is this which makes this relic so exceeding precious. Take now your choice of these, my worthy gentleman, and pay such a price as your conscience will suffer you to offer. For I am not a chapman nor a huckster, and I would never part with them did I not know that I am very near to my reward." "Aylward," said Alleyne excitedly, "this is such a chance as few folk have twice in one life. The nail I must have, and I will give it to the Abbey of Beaulieu, so that all the folk in England may go thither to wonder and to pray."
"And I will have the stone from the temple," cried Hordle John. "What would not my old mother give to have it hung over her bed?" "And I will have Aaron's rod," quoth Aylward. "I have but 5 florins in the world, and here are 4 of them." "Here are 3 more," said John.
"And here are 5 more," added Alleyne. "Holy father, I hand you 12 florins, which is all that we can give, though we well know how poor a pay it is for the wondrous things which you sell us." "Down, pride, down!" cried the pilgrim, still beating upon his chest. "Can I not bend myself to take this sorry sum which is offered me for that which has cost me the labors of a life? Give me the dross. Here are the precious relics, and oh, I pray you that you will handle them softly and with reverence, else had I rather left my unworthy bones here by the wayside." With doffed caps and eager hands the comrades took their new and precious possessions, and pressed onwards upon their journey, leaving the aged palmer still seated under the cherry tree. They rode in silence, each with his treasure in his hand, glancing at it from time to time, and scarce able to believe that chance had made them the sole owners of relics of such holiness and worth that every abbey and church in Christendom would have bid eagerly for their possession. So they journeyed, full of this good fortune, until opposite the town of Le Mas, where John's horse cast a shoe, and they were glad to find a wayside smith who might set the matter to rights. To him Aylward narrated the good hap which had befallen them, but the smith, when his eyes lit upon the relics, leaned up against his anvil and laughed, with his hand to his side, until the tears hopped down his sooty cheeks.
"Why, masters," quoth he, "this man is a coquillart, or seller of false relics, and was here in the smithy not 2 hours ago. This nail he hath sold you was taken from my nail box, and as to the wood and the stones, ye will see a heap of both outside, from which he hath filled his scrip."
"Nay, nay," cried Alleyne, "this was a holy man who had journeyed to Jerusalem and acquired a dropsy by running from the house of Pilate to the Mount of Olives."
"I know not about that," said the smith, "but I know that a man with a gray palmer's hat and gown was here no very long time ago, and that he sat on yonder stump and ate a cold pullet and drank a flask of wine. Then he begged from me one of my nails, and filling his scrip with stones he went upon his way. Look at these nails, and see if they are not the same as that which he has sold you."
"Now may God save us!" cried Alleyne, all aghast. "Is there no end to the wickedness of humankind? He so humble, so aged, so loath to take our money, and yet a villain and a cheat. Whom can we trust or believe in?"
"I will after him," said Aylward, flinging himself into the saddle. "Come, Alleyne, we may catch him ere John's horse be shod."
Away they galloped together, and ere long they saw the old gray palmer walking slowly along in front of them. He turned, however, at the sound of their hoofs, and it was clear that his blindness was a cheat like all the rest of him, for he ran swiftly through a field and so into a wood where none could follow him. They hurled their relics after him, and so rode back to the blacksmith's, the poorer both in pocket and in faith. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
CHAPTER XXVII. HOW ROGER CLUBFOOT WAS PASSED INTO PARADISE. It was evening before the three comrades came into Aiguillon. There they found Sir Nigel Loring and Ford safely lodged at the sign of the Baton Rouge, where they supped on good fare and slept between lavender scented sheets. It chanced, however, that a knight of Poitou, Sir Gaston d'Estel, was staying there on his way back from Lithuania, where he had served a term with the Teutonic knights under the land master of the presbytery of Marienburg. He and Sir Nigel sat late in high converse as to bushments, outfalls, and the intaking of cities, with many tales of warlike men and valiant deeds. Then their talk turned to minstrelsy, and the stranger knight drew forth a cittern, upon which he played a Minnelieder of the north, singing the while in a high cracked voice of Hildebrand and Brunhild and Siegfried and all the strength and beauty of the land of Almain. To this Sir Nigel answered with the romances of Sir Eglamour and of Sir Isumbras, and so through the long winter night they sat by the crackling wood fire, answering each other's songs until the crowing cocks joined in their concert. Yet with scarce an hour of rest, Sir Nigel was as blithe and bright as ever as they set forth after breakfast upon their way. "This Sir Gaston is a very worthy man," said he to his squires as they rode from the Baton Rouge. "He hath a very strong desire to advance himself, and would have entered upon some small knightly debate with me, had he not chanced to have his arm bone broken by the kick of a horse. I have conceived a great love for him, and I have promised him that when his bone is mended I will exchange thrusts with him. But we must keep to this road upon the left."
"Nay, my fair lord," quoth Aylward, "the road to Montaubon is over the river, and so through Quercy and the Agenois."
"True, my good Aylward, but I have learned from this worthy knight, who hath come over the French marches, that there is a company of Englishmen who are burning and plundering in the country round Villefranche. I have little doubt, from what he says, that they are those whom we seek."
"By my hilt, it is like enough," said Aylward. "By all accounts they had been so long at Montaubon that there would be little there worth the taking. Then, as they have already been in the south, they would come north to the country of Aveyron."
"We shall follow the lot until we come to Cahors, and then cross the marches into Villefranche," said Sir Nigel. "By St. Paul! as we are but a small band, it is very likely that we may have some very honourable and pleasing adventure, for I hear that there is little peace upon the French border." All morning they rode down the broad and winding road, barred with the shadows of poplars. Sir Nigel rode in front with his squires, while the two archers followed behind, with the sumpter mule between them. They had left Aiguillon and the Garonne far to the south, and rode now by the tranquil Lot, which curves blue and placid through a gently rolling country. Alleyne could not but mark that, whereas in Guienne there had been many townlets and few castles, there were now many castles and few houses. On either hand grey walls and square grim keeps peeped out at every few miles from amid the forests, while the few villages which they passed were all ringed round with rude walls, which spoke of the constant fear and sudden foray of a wild frontier land. Twice during the morning there came bands of horsemen swooping down upon them from the black gateways of wayside strongholds, with short stern questions as to whence they came and what their errand. Bands of armed men clanked along the highway, and the few lines of laden mules which carried the merchandise of the trader were guarded by armed varlets or by archers hired for the service. "The peace of Bretigny hath not made much change in these parts," quoth Sir Nigel, "for the country is overrun with free companions and masterless men. Yonder towers between the wood and the hill mark the town of Cahors, and beyond it is the land of France. But here is a man by the wayside, and as he hath two horses and a squire, I make little doubt that he is a knight. I pray you, Alleyne, to give him greeting from me, and to ask him for his titles and coat armor. It may be that I can relieve him of some vow, or perchance he hath a lady whom he would wish to advance."
"Nay, my fair lord," said Alleyne, "these are not horses and a squire, but mules and a varlet. The man is a mercer, for he hath a great bundle beside him."
"Now God's blessing be on your honest English voice!" cried the stranger, pricking up his ears at the sound of Alleyne's words. "Never have I heard music that was so sweet to mine ear. Come, Watkin lad, throw the bales over Laura's back. My heart was nigh broke, for it seemed that I had left all that was English behind me, and that I would never set eyes upon Norwich market square again."
He was a tall, lusty, middle aged man with a ruddy face, a brown forked beard shot with gray, and a broad Flanders hat set at the back of his head. His servant, as tall as himself, but gaunt and raw boned, had swung the bales on the back of one mule, while the merchant mounted upon the other and rode to join the party. It was easy to see as he approached, from the quality of his dress and the richness of his trappings, that he was a man of some wealth and position. "Sir knight," said he, "my name is David Micheldene, and I am a burgher and alderman of the good town of Norwich, where I live 5 doors from the church of Our Lady, as all men know on the banks of Yare. I have here my bales of cloth, which I carry to Cahors. Woe worth the day that ever I started on such an errand. I crave your gracious protection upon the way for me, my servant, and my mercery, for I have already had many perilous passages, and have now learned that Roger Clubfoot, the robber knight of Quercy, is out upon the road in front of me. I hereby agree to give you 1 rose noble if you bring me safe to the Inn of the Angel in Cahors, the same to be repaid to me or my heirs if any harm come to me or my goods." "By St. Paul!" answered Sir Nigel, "I should be a sorry knight if I asked pay for standing by a countryman in a strange land. You may ride with me and welcome, Master Micheldene, and your varlet may follow with my archers." "God's benison upon thy bounty!" cried the stranger. "Should you come to Norwich you may have cause to remember that you have been of service to Alderman Micheldene. It is not very far to Cahors, for surely I see the cathedral towers against the skyline. But I have heard much of this Roger Clubfoot, and the more I hear the less do I wish to look upon his face. Oh, but I am sick and weary of it all, and I would give half that I am worth to see my good dame sitting in peace beside me, and to hear the bells of Norwich town." "Your words are strange to me," quoth Sir Nigel, "for you have the appearance of a stout man, and I see that you wear a sword by your side." "Yet it is not my trade," answered the merchant. "I doubt not that if I set you down in my shop at Norwich you might scarce tell fustian from falding, and know little difference between the velvet of Genoa and the 3-piled cloth of Bruges. There you might well turn to me for help, but here, on a lone roadside with thick woods and robber knights, I turn to you, for it is the business to which you have been reared." "There is sooth in what you say, Master Micheldene," said Sir Nigel, "and I trust that we may come upon this Roger Clubfoot, for I have heard that he is a very stout and skilful soldier, and a man from whom much honor is to be gained." "He is a bloody robber," said the trader curtly, "and I wish I saw him kicking at the end of a halter." "It is such men as he," Sir Nigel remarked, "who give the true knight honourable deeds to do, whereby he may advance himself." "It is such men as he," retorted Micheldene, "who are like rats in a wheat rick, or moths in wool fills, a harm and a hindrance to all peaceful and honest men." "Yet if the dangers of the road weigh so heavily upon you, Master Alderman, it is a great marvel to me that you should venture so far from home." "And sometimes, sir knight, it is a marvel to myself. But I am a man who may grutch and grumble, but when I have set my face to do a thing I will not turn my back upon it until it be done. There is one Francois Villet at Cahors, who will send me wine casks for my cloth bales, so to Cahors I will go, though all the robber knights of Christendom were to line the roads like yonder poplars." "Stoutly spoken, Master Alderman. But how have you fared hitherto?" "As a lamb fares in a land of wolves. 5 times have we had to beg and pray ere we could pass. Twice I have paid toll to the wardens of the road. 3 times we have had to draw, and once at La Réole we stood sear our wool bales, Watkin and I, and we laid about us for as long as a man might chant a litany, slaying one rogue and wounding 2 others. By God's coif! We are men of peace, but we are free English burghers, not to be mishandled either in our country or abroad. Neither lord, baron, knight, or commoner shall have as much as a strike of flax of mine whilst I have strength to wag this sword." "And a passing strange sword it is," quoth Sir Nigel. "What make you, Alleyne, of these black lines which are drawn across the sheath?" "I cannot tell what they are, my fair lord." "Nor can I," said Ford. The merchant chuckled to himself. "It was a thought of mine own," said he, "for the sword was made by Thomas Wilson, the armorer, who was betrothed to my second daughter Margery. Know then that the sheath is 1 cloth yard in length, marked off according to feet and inches, to serve me as a measuring wand. It is also of the exact weight of 2 pounds, so that I may use it in the balance." "By St. Paul!" quoth Sir Nigel, "it is very clear to me that the sword is like thyself, good alderman, either apt for war or for peace. But I doubt not that even in England you have had much to suffer from the hands of robbers and outlaws." "It was only last Lammastide, sir knight, that I was left for dead near Reading as I journeyed to Winchester fair. Yet I had the rogues up at the court of Pie powder, and they will harm no more peaceful traders." "You travel much then?" "To Winchester, Linmart, Bristol fair, Stourbridge, and Bartholomew's in London town. The rest of the year you may ever find me 5 doors from the church of Our Lady, where I would from my heart that I was at this moment. And there is no air like Norwich air, and no water like the Yare, nor can all the wines of France compare with the beer of old Sam Yelverton, who keeps the Dun Cow. But out and alack! Here is an evil fruit which hangs upon this chestnut tree." As he spoke they had ridden around a curve of the road and come upon a great tree which shot one strong brown branch across their path. From the centre of this branch there hung a man, with his head at a horrid slant to his body, and his toes just touching the ground. He was naked save for a linen undershirt and a pair of woolen drawers. Beside him on a green bank there sat a small man with a solemn face, and a great bundle of papers of all colors thrusting forth from the scrip which lay beside him. He was very richly dressed, with furred robes, a scarlet hood, and wide hanging sleeves lined with flame colored silk. A great gold chain hung round his neck, and rings glittered from every finger of his hands. On his lap he had a little pile of gold and of silver, which he was dropping coin by coin into a plump pouch which hung from his girdle. "May the saints be with you, good travellers!" he shouted, as the party rode up. "May the 4 evangelists watch over you! May the 12 apostles bear you up! May the blessed army of martyrs direct your feet and lead you to eternal bliss!" "Gramercy for these good wishes," said Sir Nigel; "but I perceive, master alderman, that this man who hangs here is, by a mark of foot, the very robber knight of whom we have spoken. But there is a cartel pinned upon his breast, and I pray you, Alleyne, to read it to me." The dead robber swung slowly to and fro in the wintry wind, a fixed smile upon his swarthy face, and his bulging eyes still glaring down the highway of which he had so long been the terror. On a sheet of parchment upon his breast was printed in rude characters: "Roger Piedbot, par l'ordre du Sénéchal de Castelnau et de l'échevin de Cahors, servant fidèle du très vaillant et très puissant Edouard, prince de Galles et d'Aquitaine. Ne touchez pas, ne coûtez pas, ne dépêchez pas." "He took a sorry time in dying," said the man who sat beside him. "He could stretch one toe to the ground and bear himself up, so that I thought he would never have done. Now at last, however, he is safely in paradise, and so I may jog upon my earthly way." He mounted as he spoke a white mule which had been grazing by the wayside, all gay with fustian of gold and silver bells, and rode onward with Sir Nigel's party. "How do you know then that he is in paradise?" asked Sir Nigel. "All things are possible to God, but certes, without a miracle, I should scarce expect to find the soul of Roger Clubfoot amongst the just." "I know that he is there because I have just passed him in there," answered the stranger, rubbing his bejewelled hands together in placid satisfaction. "It is my holy mission to be a Sumner or Pardoner. I am the unworthy servant and delegate of him who holds the keys. A contrite heart and 10 rose nobles to Holy Mother Church may stave off perdition, but he hath a pardon of the first degree with 25 livres benissons, so that I doubt if he will so much as feel a twinge of purgatory. I came up even as the seneschal's archers were tying him up, and I gave him my forward that I would bide with him until he had passed. There were 2 leaden crowns among his silver, but I would not for that stand in the way of his salvation." "By St. Paul!" said Sir Nigel, "if you have indeed this power to open and to shut the gates of hope, then indeed you stand high above mankind. But if you do but claim to have it, and yet have it not, then it seems to me, master clerk, that you yourself may find the gate barred to you when you shall seek admittance." "Small of faith, small of faith!" cried the sompnour. "Ah, Sir Didymus yet walks upon the earth. And yet no words of doubt can bring anger to mine heart, or a bitter word to my lip. For am I not a poor unworthy worker in the cause of gentleness and peace? Of all these pardons which I bear, every one is stamped and signed by our holy father, the prop and centre of Christendom." "Which of them?" asked Sir Nigel. "Ha, ha!" cried the pardoner, shaking a jewelled forefinger. "Thou wouldst be deep in the secrets of Mother Church. Know then that I have both in my scrip. Those who hold with Urban shall have Urban's pardon, while I have Clement's for the Clementist. Or he who is in doubt may have both, so that come what may he shall be secure. I pray you that you will buy one, for war is bloody work, and the end is sudden, with little time for thought or shrift. Or you, sir, for you seem to be a man who would do ill to trust to your own merits." This to the alderman of Norwich, who had listened to him with a frowning brow and a sneering lip. "When I sell my cloth," quoth he, "he who buys it may weigh and feel and handle. These goods which you sell are not to be seen, nor is there any proof that you hold them. Certes, if mortal man might control God's mercy, it would be one of a lofty and godlike life, and not one who is decked out with rings and chains and silks, like a pleasure wench at a kermesse." "Thou wicked and shameless man!" cried the clerk. "Dost thou dare to raise thy voice against the unworthy servant of Mother Church?" "Unworthy enough," quoth David Micheldene. "I would have you to know, clerk, that I am a free English burgher, and that I dare say my mind to our father the Pope himself, let alone such a lackey's lackey as you." "Base born and foul mouthed knave!" cried the sompnour. "You prate of holy things to which your hog's mind can never rise. Keep silence, lest I call a curse upon you." "Silence yourself!" roared the other. "Foul bird, we found thee by the gallows like a carrion crow. A fine life thou hast of it, with thy silks and thy baubles, cozening the last few shillings from the pouches of dying men. A fig for thy curse! Bide here, if you will take my rede, for we will make England too hot for such as you when Master Wicliff has the ordering of it. Thou vile thief, it is you, and such as you, who bring an evil name upon the many churchmen who lead a pure and a holy life. Thou outside the door of heaven art more like to be inside the door of hell." At this crowning insult the sompnour, with a face ashen with rage, raised up a quivering hand and began pouring Latin imprecations upon the angry alderman. The latter, however, was not a man to be quelled by words, for he caught up his ell measure sword sheath and belaboured the cursing clerk with it. The latter, unable to escape from the shower of blows, set spurs to his mule and rode for his life, with his enemy thundering behind him. At sight of his master's sudden departure, the varlet Watkin set off after him, with a pack mule beside him, so that the four clattered away down the road together until they swept round a curve, and their babble was but a drone in the distance. Sir Nigel and Alleyne gazed in astonishment at one another, while Ford burst out a laughing. "Pardieu!" said the knight, "this David Micheldene must be one of those Lollards about whom Father Christopher of the Priory had so much to say. Yet he seemed to be no bad man from what I have seen of him." "I have heard that Wicliff hath many followers in Norwich," answered Alleyne. "By St. Paul! I have no great love for them," quoth Sir Nigel. "I am a man who am slow to change, and if you take away from me the faith that I have been taught, it would be long ere I could learn one to set in its place. It is but a chip here and a chip there, yet it may bring the tree down in time. Yet, on the other hand, I cannot but think it shame that a man should turn God's mercy on and off as a cellarman doth wine with a spigot." "Nor is it," said Alleyne, "part of the teachings of that mother church of which he had so much to say. There was sooth in what the alderman said of it." "Then, by St. Paul! they may settle it betwixt them," quoth Sir Nigel. "For me, I serve God, the king, and my lady, and so long as I can keep the path of honor I am well content. My creed shall ever be that of Chandos: Fais ce que doit, advienne qui peut, c'est commande au chevalier." Chapter 27. Of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 28. How the comrades came over the marches of France. After passing Cahors, the party branched away from the main road, and leaving the river to the north of them, followed a smaller track which wound over a vast and desolate plain. This path led them amid marshes and woods until it brought them out into a glade, with a broad stream swirling swiftly down the centre of it. Through this the horses splashed their way, and on the farther shore Sir Nigel announced to them that they were now within the borders of the land of France. For some miles they still followed the same lonely track, which led them through a dense wood, and then, widening out, curved down to an open rolling country such as they had travelled between Aiguillon and Cahors. If it were grim and desolate upon the English border, however, what can describe the hideous barrenness of this 10 times harried tract of France? The whole face of the country was scarred and disfigured, mottled over with the black blotches of burned farmsteadings and the grey gaunt gable ends of what had been chateaux. Broken fences, crumbling walls, vineyards littered with stones, the shattered arches of bridges, look where you might, the signs of ruin and rapine met the eye. Here and there only, on the farthest skyline, the gnarled turrets of a castle, or the graceful pinnacles of church or of monastery, showed where the forces of the sword or of the spirit had preserved some small islet of security in this universal flood of misery. Moodily and in silence the little party rode along the narrow and irregular track, their hearts weighed down by this far stretching land of despair. It was indeed a stricken and a blighted country, and a man might have ridden from Auvergne in the north to the marches of Foix, nor ever seen a smiling village or a thriving homestead. From time to time, as they advanced, they saw strange lean figures scraping and scratching amid the weeds and thistles, who, on sight of the band of horsemen, threw up their arms and dived in among the brushwood, as shy and as swift as wild animals. More than once, however, they came on families by the wayside who were too weak from hunger and disease to fly, so that they could but sit like hares on a tussock, with panting chests and terror in their eyes. So gaunt were these poor folk, so worn and spent, with bent and knotted frames, and sullen, hopeless, mutinous faces, that it made the young Englishman heartsick to look upon them. Indeed, it seemed as though all hope and light had gone so far from them that it was not to be brought back, for when Sir Nigel threw down a handful of silver among them there came no softening of their lined faces, but they clutched greedily at the coins, peering questioningly at him, and champing with their animal jaws. Here and there amid the brushwood the travellers saw the rude bundle of sticks which served them as a home, more like a fowl's nest than the dwelling place of man. Yet why should they build and strive, when the first adventurer who passed would set torch to their thatch, and when their own feudal lord would wring from them with blows and curses the last fruits of their toil? They sat at the lowest depth of human misery, and hugged a bitter comfort to their souls as they realized that they could go no lower. Yet they had still the human gift of speech, and would take counsel among themselves in their brushwood hovels, glaring with bleared eyes and pointing with thin fingers at the great widespread chateaux which ate like a cancer into the life of the country side. When such men, who are beyond hope and fear, begin in their dim minds to see the source of their woes, it may be an evil time for those who have wronged them. The weak man becomes strong when he has nothing, for then only can he feel the wild and mad thrill of despair. High and strong the chateau, lowly and weak the brushwood hut, but God help the seigneur and his lady when the men of the brushwood set their hands to the work of revenge. Through such a country did the party ride for 8, or it might be 9 miles, until the sun began to slope down in the west and their shadows to stream down the road in front of them. Wary and careful they must be, with watchful eyes to the right and the left, for this was no man's land, and their only passports were those which hung from their belts. Frenchman and Englishman, Gascon and Provençal, Brabante, Tardvenu, Scorcher, Flair, and Free Companion wandered and struggled over the whole of this accursed district. So bare and cheerless was the outlook, and so few and poor the dwellings, that Sir Nigel began to have fears as to whether he might find food and quarters for his little troop. It was a relief to him, therefore, when their narrow track opened out upon a larger road, and they saw some little way down it a square white house with a green bunch of holly hung out at the end of a stick from one of the upper windows. "By St. Paul!" said he, "I am right glad, for I had feared that we might have neither provant nor herbergage. Ride on, Alleyne, and tell this innkeeper that an English knight with his party will lodge with him this night." Alleyne set his spurs to his horse and reached the inn door a long bow shot before his companions. Neither varlet nor ostler could be seen, so he pushed open the door and called loudly for the landlord. 3 times he shouted, but receiving no reply, he opened an inner door and advanced into the chief guest room of the hostel. A very cheerful wood fire was sputtering and cracking in an open grate at the further end of the apartment. At one side of this fire, in a high backed oak chair, sat a lady, her face turned towards the door. The firelight played over her features, and Alleyne thought that he had never seen such a queenly power, such dignity and strength upon a woman's face. She might have been 35 years of age, with aquiline nose, firm yet sensitive mouth, dark curving brows, and deep set eyes which shone and sparkled with a shifting brilliancy. Beautiful as she was, it was not her beauty which impressed itself upon the beholder. It was her strength, her power, and the sense of wisdom which hung over the broad white brow, the decision which lay in the square jaw and delicately moulded chin. A chaplet of pearls sparkled amid her black hair, with a gauze of silver network flowing back from it over her shoulders. A black mantle was swathed round her, and she leaned back in her chair as one who was fresh from a journey. In the opposite corner there sat a very burly and broad shouldered man, clad in a black jerkin trimmed with sable, with a black velvet cap with curling white feather cocked upon the side of his head. A flask of red wine stood at his elbow, and he seemed to be very much at his ease, for his feet were stuck up upon a stool, and between his thighs he held a dish full of nuts. These he cracked between his strong white teeth, and chewed in a leisurely way, casting the shells into the blaze. As Alleyne gazed in at him, he turned his face half round and cocked an eye at him over his shoulder. It seemed to the young Englishman that he had never seen so hideous a face, for the eyes were of the lightest green, the nose was broken and driven inwards, while the whole countenance was seared and puckered with wounds. The voice, too, when he spoke, was as deep and as fierce as the growl of a beast of prey. "Young man," said he, "I know not who you may be, and I am not much inclined to bestir myself, but if it were not that I am bent upon taking my ease, I swear by the sword of Joshua that I would lay my dog whip across your shoulders for daring to fill the air with these discordant bellowings." Taken aback at this ungentle speech, and scarce knowing how to answer it fitly in the presence of a lady, Alleyne stood with his hand upon the handle of the door, while Sir Nigel and his companions dismounted. At the sound of these fresh voices and of the tongue in which they spoke, the stranger crashed his dish of nuts down upon the floor, and began himself to call for the landlord, until the whole house re echoed with his roarings. With an ashen face, the white aproned host came running at his call, his hand shaking and his very hair bristling with apprehension. "For the sake of God, sirs," he whispered as he passed, "speak him fair and do not rouse him. For the love of the Virgin, be mild with him." "Who is this, then?" asked Sir Nigel. Alleyne was about to explain, when a fresh roar from the stranger interrupted him. "Thou villain innkeeper!" he shouted. "Did I not ask you when I brought my lady here whether your inn was clean?" You did, sire." "Did I not very particularly ask you whether there were any vermin in it?" "You did, sire." "And you answered me?" "There were not, sire." "And yet, ere I have been here an hour, I find Englishmen crawling about within it. Where are we to be free from this pestilent race? Can a Frenchman upon French land not sit down in a French auberge without having his ears pained by the clack of their hideous talk? Send them packing, innkeeper, or it may be the worse for them and for you." "I will, sire, I will," cried the frightened host, and bustled from the room, while the soft, soothing voice of the woman was heard remonstrating with her furious companion. "Indeed, gentlemen, you had best go," said mine host. "It is but 6 miles to Villefranche, where there are very good quarters at the sign of the Lion Rouge." "Nay," answered Sir Nigel, "I cannot go until I have seen more of this person, for he appears to be a man from whom much is to be hoped. What is his name and title?" "Oh, it is not for my lips to name it unless by his desire. But I beg and pray you, gentlemen, that you will go from my house, for I know not what may come of it if his rage should gain the mastery of him." "By St. Paul!" lisped Sir Nigel, "this is certainly a man whom it is worth journeying far to know. Go tell him that a humble knight of England would make his further honourable acquaintance, not from any presumption, pride, or ill will, but for the advancement of chivalry and the glory of our ladies. Give him greeting from Sir Nigel Loring, and say that the glove which I bear in my cap belongs to the most peerless and lovely of her sex, whom I am now ready to uphold against any lady whose claim he might be desirous of advancing." The landlord was hesitating whether to carry this message or no, when the door of the inner room was flung open, and the stranger bounded out like a panther from its den, his hair bristling and his deformed face convulsed with anger.
"Still here?"
he snarled.
"Dogs of England, must ye be lashed hence? Tiphaine, my sword!"
He turned to seize his weapon, but as he did so his gaze fell upon the blazonry of Sir Nigel's shield, and he stood staring, while the fire in his strange green eyes softened into a sly and humorous twinkle.
"Oh Dieu!" cried he. "It is my little swordsman of Bordeaux. I should remember that coat armor, seeing that it is but 3 days since I looked upon it in the lists by Garonne. Ah, Sir Nigel, Sir Nigel, you owe me a return for this," and he touched his right arm, which was girt round just under the shoulder with a silken kerchief. But the surprise of the stranger at the sight of Sir Nigel was as nothing compared with the astonishment and the delight which shone upon the face of the knight of Hampshire as he looked upon the strange face of the Frenchman. Twice he opened his mouth, and twice he peered again, as though to assure himself that his eyes had not played him a trick. "Bertrand!" he gasped at last. "Bertrand du Guesclin!" "By St. Ives!" shouted the French soldier with a hoarse roar of laughter. "It is well that I should ride with my visor down, for he that has once seen my face does not need to be told my name. It is indeed I, Sir Nigel, and here is my hand. I give you my word that there are but 3 Englishmen in this world whom I would touch save with the sharp edge of the sword. The prince is one, Chandos the second, and you the third, for I have heard much that is good of you. I am growing aged, and am somewhat spent in the wars," quoth Sir Nigel, "but
I can lay by my sword now with an easy mind, for I can say that I have crossed swords with him who hath the bravest heart and the strongest arm of all this great kingdom of France. I have longed for it, I have dreamed of it, and now I can scarce bring my mind to understand that this great honor hath indeed been mine."
"By the Virgin of Rennes, you have given me cause to be very certain of it," said Du Guesclin, with a gleam of his broad white teeth.
"And perhaps, most honored sir, it would please you to continue the debate. Perhaps you would condescend to go further into the matter. God He knows that I am unworthy of such honor, yet I can show my 64 quarterings, and I have been present at some bickerings and scufflings during these 20 years."
"Your fame is very well known to me, and I shall ask my lady to enter your name upon my tablets," said Sir Bertrand. "There are many who wish to advance themselves, and who bide their turn, for I refuse no man who comes on such an errand. At present it may not be, for mine arm is stiff from this small touch, and I would fain do you full honor when we cross swords again. Come in with me, and let your squires come also, that my sweet spouse, the Lady Tiphaine, may say that she hath seen so famed and gentle a knight." Into the chamber they went in all peace and concord, where the Lady Tiphaine sat like queen on throne for each in turn to be presented to her. Sooth to say, the stout heart of Sir Nigel, which cared little for the wrath of her lion like spouse, was somewhat shaken by the calm, cold face of this stately dame, for 20 years of camp life had left him more at ease in the lists than in a lady's boudoir. He bethought him, too, as he looked at her set lips and deep set questioning eyes, that he had heard strange tales of this same Lady Tiphaine du Guesclin. Was it not she who was said to lay hands upon the sick, and raise them from their couches when the leeches had spent their last nostrums? Had she not forecast the future, and were there not times when in the loneliness of her chamber she was heard to hold converse with some being upon whom mortal eye never rested, some dark familiar who passed where doors were barred and windows high? Sir Nigel sunk his eye and marked a cross on the side of his leg as he greeted this dangerous dame, and yet ere 5 minutes had passed he was hers, and not he only, but his 2 young squires as well. The mind had gone out of them, and they could but look at this woman and listen to the words which fell from her lips, words which thrilled through their nerves and stirred their souls like the battle call of a bugle. Often in peaceful after days was Alleyne to think of that scene of the wayside inn of Auvergne. The shadows of evening had fallen, and the corners of the long, low, wood panelled room were draped in darkness. The sputtering wood fire threw out a circle of red flickering light, which played over the little group of wayfarers, and showed up every line and shadow of their faces. Sir Nigel sat with elbows upon knees and chin upon hands, his patch still covering one eye, but his other shining like a star, while the ruddy light gleamed upon his smooth white head. Ford was seated at his left, his lips parted, his eyes staring, and a fleck of deep color on either cheek, his limbs all rigid as one who fears to move. On the other side the famous French captain leaned back in his chair, a litter of nutshells upon his lap, his huge head half buried in a cushion, while his eyes wandered with an amused gleam from his dame to the staring, enraptured Englishman. Then, last of all, that pale, clear cut face, that sweet, clear voice, with its high, thrilling talk of the deathlessness of glory, of the worthlessness of life, of the pain of ignoble joys, and of the joy which lies in all pains which lead to a noble end. Still, as the shadows deepened, and she spoke of valor and virtue, of loyalty, honor, and fame, and still they sat drinking in her words while the fire burned down and the red ash turned to gray. "By the sainted Ives!" cried Du Guesclin at last, "it is time that we spoke of what we are to do this night, for I cannot think that in this wayside auberge there are fit quarters for an honourable company." Sir Nigel gave a long sigh as he came back from the dreams of chivalry and hardihood into which this strange woman's words had wafted him. "I care not where I sleep," said he, "but these are, indeed, somewhat rude lodgings for this fair lady." "What contents my lord contents me," quoth she. "I perceive, Sir Nigel, that you are under a vow."
she added, glancing at his covered eye. "It is my purpose to attempt some small deed," he answered. "And the glove, it is your lady's?" "It is indeed my sweet wife's." "Who is doubtless proud of you." "Say rather I of her," quoth he quickly. "God, He knows that I am not worthy to be her humble servant. It is easy, lady, for a man to ride forth in the light of day, and do his devoir when all men have eyes for him. But in a woman's heart there is a strength and truth which asks no praise, and can but be known to him whose treasure it is." The Lady Tiphaine smiled across at her husband. "You have often told me, Bertrand, that there were very gentle knights amongst the English," quoth she. "Aye, aye," said he moodily. "But to horse, Sir Nigel. You and yours and we shall seek the chateau of Sir Tristram de Rochefort, which is 2 miles on this side of Villefranche. He is seneschal of Auvergne, and mine old war companion." "Certes, he would have welcome for you," quoth Sir Nigel; "but indeed he might look askance at one who comes without permit over the marches." "By the Virgin! when he learns that you have come to draw away the rascals, he will be very blithe to look upon your face. Innkeeper, here are 10 gold pieces. What is over and above your reckoning you may take off from your charges to the next needy knight who comes this way. Come then, for it grows late and the horses are stamping in the roadway." The Lady Tiphaine and her spouse sprang upon their steeds without setting feet to stirrup, and away they jingled down the white moonlit highway, with Sir Nigel at the lady's bridle arm, and Ford a spear's length behind him. Alleyne had lingered for an instant in the passage, and as he did so there came a wild outcry from the chamber on the left, and out there ran Aylward and John, laughing together like 2 schoolboys who are bent upon a prank. At sight of Alleyne they slunk past him with somewhat of a shamefaced air, and springing upon their horses galloped after their party. The hubbub within the chamber did not cease, however, but rather increased with yells of "A moi, mes amis! A moi, camarades! A moi, l'honorable champion de l'évêque de Montauban! A la recousse de l'Église Sainte!" So shrill was the outcry that both the innkeeper and Alleyne, with every varlet within hearing, rushed wildly to the scene of the uproar. It was indeed a singular scene which met their eyes. The room was a long and lofty one, stone floored and bare, with a fire at the further end, upon which a great pot was boiling. A deal table ran down the centre, with a wooden wine pitcher upon it, and 2 horn cups. Some way from it was a smaller table with a single beaker and a broken wine bottle. From the heavy wooden rafters which formed the roof there hung rows of hooks which held up the sides of bacon, joints of smoked beef, and strings of onions for winter use. In the very centre of all these, upon the largest hook of all, there hung a fat little red faced man with enormous whiskers, kicking madly in the air and clawing at the rafters, hams, and all else that was within hand grasp. The huge steel hook had been passed through the collar of his leather jerkin, and there he hung like a fish on a line, writhing, twisting, and screaming, but utterly unable to free himself from his extraordinary position. It was not until Alleyne and the landlord had mounted on the table that they were able to lift him down, when he sank gasping with rage into a seat, and rolled his eyes round in every direction. "Has he gone?" quoth he. "Gone? Who?" "He, the man with the red beard, the giant man." "Yes," said Alleyne, "he hath gone." "And comes not back?" "No." "The better for him," cried the little man with a long sigh of relief. "Mon Dieu! What, am I not the champion of the Bishop of Montauban? Ah, could I have descended, could I have come down ere he fled, then you would have seen, you would have beheld a spectacle then. There would have been one rascal the less upon the earth." "Ma foi, yes." "Good Master Pelligny," said the landlord, "these gentlemen have not gone very fast, and I have a horse in the stable at your disposal, for I would rather have such bloody doings as you threaten outside the 4 walls of mine auberge." "I hurt my leg and cannot ride," quoth the bishop's champion. "I strained a sinew on the day that I slew 3 men at Castelnau." "God save you, Master Pelligny!" cried the landlord. "It must be an awesome thing to have so much blood upon one's soul. And yet I do not wish to see so valiant a man mishandled, and so I will, for friendship's sake, ride after this Englishman and bring him back to you.
"You shall not stir," cried the champion, seizing the innkeeper in a convulsive grasp. "I have a love for you, Gaston, and I would not bring your house into ill repute, nor do such scathe to these walls and chattels as must befall if two such men as this Englishman and I fall to work here." "Nay, think not of me," cried the innkeeper. "What are my walls set against the honor of Francois Pursuivant d'Amour Pelligny, champion of the Bishop of Montaubon? My horse, Andre! By the saints, no, Gaston, I will not have it. You have said truly that it is an awesome thing to have such rough work upon one's soul. I am but a rude soldier, yet I have a mind. Mon Dieu! I reflect, I weigh, I balance. Shall I not meet this man again? Shall I not bear him in mind? Shall I not know him by his great paws and his red head? Ma foi, yes." "And may I ask, sir," said Alleyne, "why it is that you call yourself champion of the Bishop of Montaubon?" "You may ask aught which it is becoming to me to answer. The bishop hath need of a champion, because if any cause be set to test of combat it would scarce become his office to go down into the lists with leather and shield and cudgel to exchange blows with any varlet. He looks around him then for some tried fighting man, some honest smiter, who can give a blow or take one. It is not for me to say how far he hath succeeded, but it is sooth that he who thinks that he hath but to do with the Bishop of Montaubon finds himself face to face with Francois Pursuivant d'Amour Pelligny." At this moment there was a clatter of hoofs upon the road, and a varlet by the door cried out that one of the Englishmen was coming back. The champion looked wildly about for some corner of safety, and was clambering up towards the window, when Ford's voice sounded from without, calling upon Alleyne to hasten, or he might scarce find his way. Bidding adieu to landlord and to champion, therefore, he set off at a gallop, and soon overtook the two archers. "A pretty thing this, John," said he. "You wilt have Holy Church upon you if you hang her champions upon iron hooks in an inn kitchen."
"Oh, it was done without thinking," he answered apologetically, while Aylward burst into a shout of laughter. "By my hilt, mon petit," said he, "you would have laughed also could you have seen it. For this man was so swollen with pride that he would neither drink with us, nor sit at the same table with us, nor as much as answer a question, but must needs talk to the varlet all the time that it was well there was peace, and that he had slain more Englishmen than there were tags to his doublet. Our good old John could scarce lay his tongue to French enough to answer him, so he must needs reach out his great hand to him and place him very gently where you saw him. But we must on, for I can scarce hear their hoofs upon the road." "I think that I can see them yet," said Ford, peering down the moonlit road. "Pardieu, yes! Now they ride forth from the shadow, and yonder dark clump is the castle of Villefranche. En avant, camarades, or Sir Nigel may reach the gates before us. But hark, mes amis, what sound is that?" As he spoke the hoarse blast of a horn was heard from some woods upon the right. An answering call rung forth upon their left, and hard upon it two others from behind them. "They are the horns of swineherds," quoth Aylward, "though why they blow them so late I cannot tell." "Let us on then," said Ford, and the whole party, setting their spurs to their horses, soon found themselves at the castle of Villefranche, where the drawbridge had already been lowered and the portcullis raised in response to the summons of Du Guesclin. Chapter 28. Chapter 29 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 29. How the blessed hour of sight came to the Lady Tiphaine. Sir Tristram de Rochefort, Seneschal of Auvergne and Lord of Villefranche, was a fierce and renowned soldier who had grown grey in the English wars. As Lord of the Marches and guardian of an exposed countryside, there was little rest for him, even in the times of so called peace, and his whole life was spent in raids and outfalls upon the Brabanters, latecomers, flayers, free companions, and roving archers who wandered over his province.
At times he would come back in triumph, and a dozen corpses swinging from the summit of his keep would warn evil doers that there was still a law in the land. At others his ventures were not so happy, and he and his troop would spur it over the drawbridge with clatter of hoofs hard at their heels and whistle of arrows about their ears. Hard he was of hand and harder of heart, hated by his foes and yet not loved by those whom he protected, for twice he had been taken prisoner, and twice his ransom had been wrung by dint of blows and tortures out of the starving peasants and ruined farmers. Wolves or watch dogs, it was hard to say from which the sheep had most to fear. The castle of Villefranche was harsh and stern as its master. A broad moat, a high outer wall turreted at the corners, with a great black keep towering above all, so it lay before them in the moonlight. By the light of two flambeaux, protruded through the narrow slit shaped openings at either side of the ponderous gate, they caught a glimpse of the glitter of fierce eyes and of the gleam of the weapons of the guard. The sight of the two-headed eagle of Du Guesclin, however, was a passport into any fortalice in France, and ere they had passed the gate the old border knight came running forwards with hands outthrown to greet his famous countryman. Nor was he less glad to see Sir Nigel when the Englishman's errand was explained to him, for these archers had been a sore thorn in his side, and had routed two expeditions which he had sent against them. A happy day it would be for the Seneschal of Auvergne when they should learn that the last yew bow was over the marches. The material for a feast was ever at hand in days when, if there was grim want in the cottage, there was at least rude plenty in the castle. Within an hour the guests were seated around a board which creaked under the great pasties and joints of meat, varied by those more dainty dishes in which the French excelled, the spiced ortolan and the truffled becaficots. The Lady Rochefort, a bright and laughter loving dame, sat upon the left of her warlike spouse, with Lady Tiphaine upon the right. Beneath sat Du Guesclin and Sir Nigel, with Sir Amaury Monticourt of the Order of the Hospitallers, and Sir Otto Harnett, a wandering knight from the kingdom of Bohemia. These, with Alleyne and Ford, 4 French squires, and the castle chaplain, made the company who sat together that night and made good cheer in the castle of Villefranche. The great fire crackled in the grate, the hooded hawks slept upon their perches, the rough deer hounds with expectant eyes crouched upon the tiled floor. Close at the elbows of the guests stood the dapper little lilac coated pages. The laugh and jest circled round, and all was harmony and comfort. Little they recked of the brushwood men who crouched in their rags along the fringe of the forest, and looked with wild and haggard eyes at the rich warm glow which shot a golden bar of light from the high arched windows of the castle. Supper over, the tables dormant were cleared away as by magic, and trestles and bancals arranged around the blazing fire, for there was a bitter nip in the air. The Lady Tiphaine had sunk back in her cushioned chair, and her long dark lashes drooped low over her sparkling eyes. Alleyne, glancing at her, noted that her breath came quick and short, and that her cheeks had blanched to a lily white. Du Guesclin eyed her keenly from time to time, and passed his broad brown fingers through his crisp curly black hair with the air of a man who is perplexed in his mind. "These folk here," said the knight of Bohemia, "do not seem too well fed." "Ah, canaille!" cried the Lord of Villefranche. "You would scarce credit it, and yet it is sooth that when I was taken at Poitiers it was all that my wife and foster brother could do to raise the money from them for my ransom. The sulky dogs would rather have 3 twists of a rack or the thumbkins for an hour than pay out a denier for their own feudal father and liege lord. Yet there is not one of them but hath an old stocking full of gold pieces hid away in a snug corner." "Why do they not buy food then?" asked Sir Nigel. "By St. Paul! it seemed to me their bones were breaking through their skin." "It is their grutching and grumbling which makes them thin. We have a saying here, Sir Nigel, that if you pummel Jacques Bonhomme he will pat you, but if you pat him he will pummel you. Doubtless you find it so in England." "Ma foi, no," said Sir Nigel.
I have 2 Englishmen of this class in my train, who are at this instant, I make little doubt, as full of your wine as any cask in your cellar. He who pummelled them might come by such a pat as he would be likely to remember." "I cannot understand it," quoth the seneschal, "for the English knights and nobles whom I have met were not men to brook the insolence of the base born." "Perchance, my fair lord, the poor folk are sweeter and of a better countenance in England," laughed the Lady Rochefort. "Mon Dieu, you cannot conceive to yourself how ugly they are. Without hair, without teeth, all twisted and bent. For me, I cannot think how the good God ever came to make such people. I cannot bear it. Aye, and so my trusty Raoul goes ever before me with a cudgel to drive them from my path." "Yet they have souls, fair lady, they have souls," murmured the chaplain, a white haired man with a weary, patient face. "So I have heard you tell them," said the lord of the castle. "As for myself, father, though I am a true son of Holy Church, yet I think that you were better employed in saying your mass and in teaching the children of my men at arms than in going over the country side to put ideas in these folks' heads which would never have been there but for you. I have heard that you have said to them that their souls are as good as ours, and that it is likely that in another life they may stand as high as the oldest blood of Auvergne. For my part, I believe that there are so many worthy knights and gallant gentlemen in heaven who know how such things should be arranged, that there is little fear that we shall find ourselves mixed up with base roturiers or swineherds. Tell your beads, father, and con your psalter, but do not come between me and those whom the king has given to me." "God help them!" cried the old priest. "A higher king than yours has given them to me, and I tell you here in your own castle hall, Sir Tristram de Rochefort, that you have sinned deeply in your dealings with these poor folk, and that the hour will come, and may even now be at hand, when God's hand will be heavy upon you for what you have done." He rose as he spoke and walked slowly from the room. "Pest take him!" cried the French knight. "Now, what is a man to do with a priest, Sir Bertrand? For one can neither fight him like a man nor coax him like a woman." "Ah, Sir Bertrand knows, the naughty one!" cried the Lady Rochefort. "Have we not all heard how he went to Avignon and squeezed 50,000 crowns out of the Pope?" "Ma foi!" said Sir Nigel, looking with a mixture of horror and admiration at Du Guesclin. "Did not your heart sink within you? Were you not smitten with fears? Have you not felt a curse hang over you?" "I have not observed it," said the Frenchman carelessly. "But, by St. Ives! Tristram, this chaplain of yours seems to me to be a worthy man, and you should give heed to his words, for though I care nothing for the curse of a bad pope, it would be a grief to me to have aught but a blessing from a good priest." "Hark to that, my fair lord!" cried the Lady Rochefort. "Take heed, I pray thee, for I do not wish to have a blight cast over me, nor a palsy of the limbs. I remember that once before you angered Father Stephen, and my tire woman said that I lost more hair in 7 days than ever before in a month." "If that be a sign of sin, then, by St. Paul, I have much upon my soul," said Sir Nigel, amid a general laugh. "But in very truth, Sir Tristram, if I may venture a word of counsel, I should advise that you make your peace with this good man." "He shall have 4 silver candlesticks," said the seneschal moodily. "And yet I would that he would leave the folk alone. You cannot conceive in your mind how stubborn and brainless they are. Mules and pigs are full of reason beside them. God he knows that I have had great patience with them. It was but last week that, having to raise some money, I called up to the castle Jean Goubert, who, as all men know, has a casket full of gold pieces hidden away in some hollow tree. I give you my word that I did not so much as lay a stripe upon his fool's back, but after speaking with him, and telling him how needful the money was to me, I left him for the night to think over the matter in my dungeon. What do you think the dog did? Why, in the morning we found that he had made a rope from the strips of his leathern jerkin, and had hung himself to the bar of the window. For me, I cannot conceive such wickedness," cried the lady. "And there was Gertrude Le Boeuf, as fair a maiden as eye could see, but as bad and bitter as the rest of them.
When young Amaury de Valence was here last Lammastide, he looked kindly upon the girl, and even spoke of taking her into his service. What does she do with her dog of a father? Why, they tie themselves together and leap into the Linden Pool, where the water is 5 spears' length deep. I give you my word that it were a great grief to young Amaury, and it was days ere he could cast it from his mind. But how can one serve people who are so foolish and so ungrateful?" While the seneschal of Villefranche had been detailing the evil doings of his tenants, Alleyne had been unable to take his eyes from the face of Lady Tiphaine. She had lain back in her chair with drooping eyelids and bloodless face, so that he had feared at first her journey had weighed heavily upon her, and that the strength was ebbing out of her. Of a sudden, however, there came a change, for a dash of bright color flickered up on to either cheek, and her lids were slowly raised again upon eyes which sparkled with such lustre as Alleyne had never seen in human eyes before, while their gaze was fixed intently, not upon the company, but on the dark tapestry which draped the wall. So transformed and so ethereal was her expression that Alleyne, in his loftiest dream of archangel or of seraph, had never pictured so sweet, so womanly, and yet so wise a face. Glancing at Du Guesclin, Alleyne saw that he also was watching his wife closely, and from the twitching of his features and the beads upon his brick colored brow, it was easy to see that he was deeply agitated by the change which he marked in her. "How is it with you, lady?" he asked at last in a tremulous voice. Her eyes remained fixed intently upon the wall, and there was a long pause ere she answered him. Her voice, too, which had been so clear and ringing, was now low and muffled, as that of one who speaks from a distance. "All is very well with me, Bertrand," said she. "The blessed hour of sight has come round to me again." "I could see it come! I could see it come!" he exclaimed, passing his fingers through his hair with the same perplexed expression as before. "This is untoward, Sir Tristram," he said at last, "and I scarce know in what words to make it clear to you, and to your fair wife, and to Sir Nigel Loring, and to these other stranger knights. My tongue is a blunt one, and fitter to shout words of command than to clear up such a matter as this, of which I can myself understand little. This, however, I know, that my wife is come of a very sainted race, whom God hath in his wisdom endowed with wondrous powers, so that Tiphaine Raquenel was known throughout Brittany ere ever I first saw her at Dinan. Yet these powers are ever used for good, and they are the gift of God and not of the devil, which is the difference betwixt white magic and black." "Perchance it would be well that we should send for Father Stephen," said Sir Tristram. "It would be best that he should come," cried the Hospitaller. "And bring with him a flask of holy water," added the Knight of Bohemia. "Not so, gentlemen," answered Sir Bertrand. "It is not needful that this priest should be called, and it is in my mind that in asking for this ye cast some slight shadow or slur upon the good name of my wife, as though it were still doubtful whether her power came to her from above or below. If ye have indeed such a doubt, I pray that you will say so, that we may discuss the matter in a fitting way." "For myself," said Sir Nigel, "I have heard such words fall from the lips of this lady that I am of the opinion that there is no woman, save only one, who can in any way be compared to her in beauty and in goodness. Should any gentleman think otherwise, I should deem it a great honor to run a small course with him, or debate the matter in whatever way might be most pleasing to him." "Nay, it would ill become me to cast a slur upon a lady who is both my guest and the wife of my comrade in arms," said the seneschal of Villefranche. "I have perceived also that on her mantle there is marked a silver cross, which is surely a sign enough that there is naught of evil in these strange powers which you say that she possesses." This argument of the seneschal's appealed so powerfully to the Bohemian and to the Hospitaller that they at once intimated that their objections had been entirely overcome, while even the Lady Rochefort, who had sat shivering and crossing herself, ceased to cast glances at the door and allowed her fears to turn to curiosity. "Among the gifts which have been vouchsafed to my wife," said Du Guesclin, "there is the wondrous one of seeing into the future, but it comes very seldom upon her, and goes as quickly, for none can command it. The blessed hour of sight
as she hath named it, has come but twice since I have known her, and I can vouch for it that all that she hath told me was true, for on the evening of the battle of Auray she said that the morrow would be an ill day for me and for Charles of Blois. Ere the sun had sunk again he was dead, and I the prisoner of Sir John Chandos. Yet it is not every question that she can answer, but only those." "Bertrand, Bertrand!" cried the lady in the same muttering, far away voice. "The blessed hour passes. Use it, Bertrand, while you may." "I will, my sweet. Tell me then what fortune comes upon me." "Danger, Bertrand, deadly, pressing danger, which creeps upon you, and you know it not." The French soldier burst into a thunderous laugh, and his green eyes twinkled with amusement. "At what time during these 20 years would not that have been a true word?" he cried. "Danger is in the air that I breathe. But is this so very close, Tiphaine?" "Here, now, close upon you." The words came out in broken, strenuous speech, while the lady's fair face was writhed and drawn, like that of one who looks upon a horror which strikes the words from her lips. Du Guesclin gazed round the tapestried room, at the screens, the tables, the abace, the credence, the buffet with its silver salver, and the half circle of friendly wondering faces. There was an utter stillness, save for the sharp breathing of the Lady Tiphaine, and for the gentle soughing of the wind outside, which wafted to their ears the distant call upon a swineherd's horn. "The danger may bide," said he, shrugging his broad shoulders. "And now, Tiphaine, tell us what will come of this war in Spain." "I can see little," she answered, straining her eyes and puckering her brow, as one who would fain clear her sight. "There are mountains and dry plains, and flash of arms and shouting of battle cries. Yet it is whispered to me that by failure you will succeed." "Sir Nigel, how like you that?" quoth Bertrand, shaking his head. "It is like mead and vinegar, half sweet, half sour. And is there no question which you would ask my lady?" "Certes there is. I would fain know, fair lady, how all things are at Twynham Castle, and above all how my sweet lady employs herself." "To answer this I would fain lay hand upon one whose thoughts turn strongly to this castle which you have named. Nay, my Lord Loring, it is whispered to me that there is another here who hath thought more deeply of it than you." "Thought more of mine own home?" cried Sir Nigel. "Lady, I fear that in this matter at least you are mistaken." "Not so, Sir Nigel. Come hither, young man, young English squire with the gray eyes. Now give me your hand, and place it here across my brow, that I may see that which you have seen. What is this that rises before me? Mist, mist, rolling mist, with a square black tower above it. See, it shreds out, it thins, it rises, and there lies a castle in green plain, with the sea beneath it, and a great church within bowshot. There are 2 rivers which run through the meadows, and between them lie the tents of the besiegers." "The besiegers!" cried Alleyne, Ford, and Sir Nigel, all 3 in a breath. "Yes, truly, and they press hard upon the castle, for they are an exceeding multitude and full of courage. See how they storm and rage against the gate, while some rear ladders, and others, line after line, sweep the walls with their arrows. There are many leaders who shout and beckon, and one, a tall man with a golden beard, who stands before the gate stamping his foot and hallooing them on as a pricker doth the hounds. But those in the castle fight bravely. There is a woman, 2 women, who stand upon the walls and give heart to the men at arms. They shower down arrows, darts, and great stones. Ah, they have struck down the tall leader, and the others give back. The mist thickens, and I can see no more." "By St. Paul!" said Sir Nigel, "I do not think that there can be any such doings at Christchurch, and I am very easy of the fortalice so long as my sweet wife hangs the key of the outer bailey at the head of her bed. Yet I will not deny that you have pictured the castle as well as I could have done myself, and I am full of wonderment at all that I have heard and seen." "I would, Lady Tiphaine," cried the Lady Rochefort, "that you would use your power to tell me what hath befallen my golden bracelet, which I wore when hawking upon the second Sunday of Advent, and have never set eyes upon since." "Nay, lady," said Du Guesclin, "it does not befit so great and wondrous a power to pry and search and play the varlet even to the beautiful chatelaine of Villefranche. Ask a worthy question, and with the blessing of God you shall have a worthy answer." "Then I would fain ask," cried one of the French squires, "as to which may hope to conquer in these wars betwixt the English and ourselves." "Both will conquer, and each will hold its own," answered the Lady Tiphaine. "Then we shall still hold Gascony and Guienne?" cried Sir Nigel. The lady shook her head. "French land, French blood, French speech," she answered. "They are French, and France shall have them." "And not Bordeaux?" cried Sir Nigel excitedly. "Bordeaux also is for France." "But Calais?" "Calais too." "Woe worth me then, and ill hail to these evil words! If Bordeaux and Calais be gone, then what is left for England?" "It seems indeed that there are evil times coming upon your country," said Du Guesclin. "In our fondest hopes we never thought to hold Bordeaux. By St. Ives! this news hath warmed the heart within me. Our dear country will then be very great in the future, Tiphaine?" "Great and rich and beautiful," she cried. "Far down the course of time I can see her still leading the nations, a wayward queen among the peoples, great in war but greater in peace, quick in thought, deft in action, with her people's will for her sole monarch, from the sands of Calais to the blue seas of the south." "Ha!" cried Du Guesclin, with his eyes flashing in triumph. "You hear her, Sir Nigel, and she never yet said word which was not sooth." The English knight shook his head moodily. "What of my own poor country?" said he. "I fear, lady, that what you have said bodes but small good for her." The lady sat with parted lips, and her breath came quick and fast. "My God!" she cried, "what is this that is shown me? Whence come they, these peoples, these lordly nations, these mighty countries which rise up before me? I look beyond, and others rise, and yet others, far and farther to the shores of the uttermost waters. They crowd, they swarm. The world is given to them, and it resounds with the clang of their hammers and the ringing of their church bells. They call them many names, and they rule them this way or that, but they are all English, for I can hear the voices of the people. On I go, and onwards over seas where man hath never yet sailed, and I see a great land under new stars and a stranger sky, and still the land is England. Where have her children not gone? What have they not done? Her banner is planted on ice. Her banner is scorched in the sun. She lies athwart the lands, and her shadow is over the seas. Bertrand, Bertrand, we are undone, for the buds of her bud are even as our choicest flower." Her voice rose into a wild cry, and throwing up her arms she sank back white and nerveless into the deep oaken chair. "It is over," said Du Guesclin moodily, as he raised her drooping head with his strong brown hand. "Wine for the lady squire. The blessed hour of sight hath passed." CHAPTER 29. Chapter 30 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 30. How the brushwood men came to the chateau of Villefranche. It was late ere Alleyn Edricson, having carried Sir Nigel the goblet of spiced wine which it was his custom to drink after the curling of his hair, was able at last to seek his chamber. It was a stone flagged room upon the second floor, with a bed in a recess for him,
and two smaller pallets on the other side, on which Aylward and Hordle John were already snoring. Alleyne had knelt down to his evening orisons when there came a tap at his door, and Ford entered with a small lamp in his hand. His face was deadly pale, and his hand shook until the shadows flickered up and down the wall. "What is it, Ford?" cried Alleyne, springing to his feet. "I can scarce tell you," said he, sitting down on the side of the couch and resting his chin upon his hand. "I know not what to say or what to think." "Has aught befallen you, then?" "Yes, or I may have been slave to my own fancy. I tell you, lad, that I am all undone, like a fretted bowstring. Hark hither, Alleyne. It cannot be that you have forgotten little Tita, the daughter of the old glass stainer at Bordeaux." "I remember her well." "She and I, Alleyne, broke the lucky groat together ere we parted, and she wears my ring upon her finger. 'Caro mio,' quoth she when we last parted, 'I shall be near thee in the wars, and thy danger will be my danger.' Alleyne, as God is my help, as I came up the stairs this night I saw her stand before me, her face in tears, her hands out as though in warning. I saw it, Alleyne, even as I see those two archers upon their couches. Our very finger tips seemed to meet ere she thinned away like a mist in the sunshine." "I would not give overmuch thought to it," answered Alleyne. "Our minds will play us strange pranks, and bethink you that these words of the Lady Tiphaine du Guesclin have wrought upon us and shaken us." Ford shook his head. "I saw little Tita as clearly as though I were back at the Rue des Apotres in Bordeaux," said he. "But the hour is late, and I must go." "Where do you sleep, then?" "In the chamber above you. May the saints be with us all." He rose from the couch and left the chamber, while Alleyne could hear his feet sounding upon the winding stair. The young squire walked across to the window and gazed out at the moonlit landscape, his mind absorbed by the thought of the Lady Tiphaine, and of the strange words that she had spoken to him as to what was going forward at Twynham Castle. Leaning his elbows upon the stonework, he was deeply plunged in reverie, when in a moment his thoughts were brought back to Villefranche and to the scene before him. The window at which he stood was in the second floor of that portion of the castle which was nearest to the keep. In front lay the broad moat, with the moon lying upon its surface, now clear and round, now drawn lengthways as the breeze stirred the water. Beyond, the plain sloped down to a thick wood, while further to the left a second wood shut out the view. Between the two an open glade stretched, silvered in the moonshine, with the river curving across the lower end of it. As he gazed, he saw of a sudden a man steal forth from the wood into the open clearing. He walked with his head sunk, his shoulders curved, and his knees bent, as one who strives hard to remain unseen. 10 paces from the fringe of trees he glanced around, and waving his hand he crouched down and was lost to sight among a belt of furze bushes. After him there came a second man, and after him a third, a fourth, and a fifth, stealing across the narrow open space and darting into the shelter of the brushwood. 79 Alleyne counted of these dark figures flitting across the line of moonlight. Many bore huge burdens upon their backs, though what it was that they carried he could not tell at this distance. Out of the one wood and into the other they passed, all with the same crouching, furtive gait, until the black bristle of trees had swallowed up the last of them. For a moment Alleyne stood in the window, still staring down at the silent forest, uncertain as to what he should think of these midnight walkers. Then he bethought him that there was one beside him who was fitter to judge on such matters. His fingers had scarce rested upon Aylward's shoulder ere the bowman was on his feet, with his hand outstretched to his sword. "Qui va?" he cried. "Oh, hola, mon petit! By my hilt, I thought there had been a camisade. What then, mon gar?" "Come hither by the window, Aylward," said Alleyne. "I have seen 80 men pass from yonder shore across the glade, and nigh every man of them had a great burden on his back. What think you of it?" "I think nothing of it, mon camarade.
There are as many masterless folk in this country as there are rabbits on Cowdray Down, and there are as many who show their faces at night, but would dance in a hempen collar if they stirred forth in the day. On all the French marches are droves of outcasts, reivers, spoilers, and drawlatches, of whom I judge that these are some, though I marvel that they should dare come so nigh to the castle of the seneschal. All seems very quiet now," he added, peering out of the window. "They are in the further wood," said Alleyne. "And there they may bide. Back to rest, mon petit, for by my hilt each day now will bring its own work. Yet it would be well to shoot the bolt in yonder door when one is in strange quarters. So." He threw himself down upon his pallet, and in an instant was fast asleep. It might have been about 3 o'clock in the morning when Alleyne was aroused from a troubled sleep by a low cry or exclamation. He listened, but as he heard no more, he set it down as the challenge of the guard upon the walls, and dropped off to sleep once more. A few minutes later he was disturbed by a gentle creaking of his own door, as though some one were pushing cautiously against it, and immediately afterwards he heard the soft thud of cautious footsteps upon the stair which led to the room above, followed by a confused noise and a muffled groan. Alleyne sat up on his couch with all his nerves in a tingle, uncertain whether these sounds might come from a simple cause, some sick archer and visiting leech perhaps, or whether they might have some more sinister meaning. But what danger could threaten them here in this strong castle, under the care of famous warriors, with high walls and a broad moat around them? Who was there that could injure them? He had well nigh persuaded himself that his fears were a foolish fancy, when his eyes fell upon that which sent the blood cold to his heart, and left him gasping, with hands clutching at the counterpane. Right in front of him was the broad window of the chamber, with the moon shining brightly through it. For an instant something had obscured the light, and now a head was bobbing up and down outside, the face looking in at him and swinging slowly from one side of the window to the other. Even in that dim light there could be no mistaking those features. Drawn, distorted, and blood stained, they were still those of the young fellow squire who had sat so recently upon his own couch. With a cry of horror Alleyne sprang from his bed and rushed to the casement, while the two archers, aroused by the sound, seized their weapons and stared about them in bewilderment. One glance was enough to show Edricson that his fears were but too true. Foully murdered, with a score of wounds upon him and a rope round his neck, his poor friend had been cast from the upper window and swung slowly in the night wind, his body rasping against the wall, and his disfigured face upon a level with the casement. "My God!" cried Alleyne, shaking in every limb. "What has come upon us? What devil's deed is this?" "Here is flint and steel," said John stolidly. "The lamp, Aylward. This moonshine softens a man's heart. Now we may use the eyes which God hath given us." "By my hilt!" cried Aylward, as the yellow flame flickered up, "it is indeed young Master Ford, and I think that this seneschal is a black villain who dare not face us in the day, but would murder us in our sleep. By the twang of string, if I do not soak a goose's feather with his heart's blood, it will be no fault of Samkin Aylward of the White Company."
"But, Aylward, think of the men whom I saw yesternight," said Alleyne. "It may not be the seneschal. It may be that others have come into the castle. I must to Sir Nigel ere it be too late. Let me go, Aylward, for my place is by his side."
"One moment, mon gar. Put that steel headpiece on the end of my yew stave. So. I will put it first through the door, for it is ill to come out when you can neither see nor guard yourself. Now, camarade, out swords and stand ready. Hola! By my hilt, it is time that we were stirring."
As he spoke a sudden shouting broke forth in the castle, with the scream of a woman and the rush of many feet. Then came the sharp clink of clashing steel, and a roar like that of an angry lion.
"Notre Dame du Guesclin! St. Ives! St. Ives!"
the bowman pulled back the bolt of the door and thrust out the headpiece at the end of the bow. A clash, the clatter of the steel cap upon the ground, and ere the man who struck could heave up for another blow, the archer had passed his sword through his body. "On, camarade, on!" he cried, and breaking fiercely past two men who threw themselves in his way, he sped down the broad corridor in the direction of the shouting. A sharp turning, then a second one, brought them to the head of a short stair, from which they looked straight down upon the scene of the uproar. A square oaken floor lay beneath them, from which opened the doors of the principal guest chambers. This hall was as light as day, for torches burned in numerous sconces upon the walls, throwing strange shadows from the tusked or antlered heads which ornamented them. At the very foot of the stair, close upon the open door of their chamber, lay the seneschal and his wife, she with her head shorn from her shoulders, he thrust through with a sharpened stake, which still protruded from either side of his body. 3 servants of the castle lay dead beside them, all torn and draggled as though a pack of wolves had been upon them. In front of the central guest chamber stood Du Guesclin and Sir Nigel, half clad and unarmored, with the mad joy of battle gleaming in their eyes. Their heads were thrown back, their lips compressed, their blood stained swords poised over their right shoulders, and their left feet thrown out. 3 dead men lay huddled together in front of them, while a fourth, with the blood squirting from a severed vessel, lay back with updrawn knees, breathing in wheezy gasps. Further back, all panting together like the wind in a tree, there stood a group of fierce, wild creatures, bare armed and bare legged, gaunt, unshaven, with deep set, murderous eyes and wild beast faces. With their flashing teeth, their bristling hair, their mad leapings and screamings, they seemed to Alleyne more like fiends from the pit than men of flesh and blood. Even as he looked, they broke into a hoarse yell and dashed once more upon the 2 knights, hurling themselves madly upon their sword points, clutching, scrambling, biting, tearing, careless of wounds, if they could but drag the 2 soldiers to earth. Sir Nigel was thrown down by the sheer weight of them, and Sir Bertrand, with his thunderous war cry, was swinging round his heavy sword to clear a space for him to rise, when the whistle of 2 long English arrows and the rush of the squire and the 2 English archers down the stairs turned the tide of the combat. The assailants gave back, the knights rushed forward, and in a very few moments the hall was cleared, and Hordle John had hurled the last of the wild men down the steep steps which led from the end of it. "Do not follow them," cried Du Guesclin. "We are lost if we scatter. For myself, I care not a denier, though it is a poor thing to meet one's end at the hands of such scum. But I have my dear lady here, who must by no means be risked. We have breathing space now, and I would ask you, Sir Nigel, what it is that you would counsel." "By St. Paul!" answered Sir Nigel, "I can by no means understand what hath befallen us, save that I have been woken up by your battle cry, and rushing forth found myself in the midst of this small bickering. Harrow and alas for the lady and the seneschal! What dogs are they who have done this bloody deed?" "They are the Jacks, the men of the brushwood. They have the castle, though I know not how it hath come to pass. Look from this window into the bailey." "By heaven!" cried Sir Nigel, "it is as bright as day with the torches. The gates stand open, and there are 3,000 of them within the walls. See how they rush and scream and wave. What is it that they thrust out through the postern door? My God, it is a man at arms, and they pluck him limb from limb like hounds on a wolf. Now another, and yet another. They hold the whole castle, for I see their faces at the windows. See, there are some with great bundles on their backs." "It is dried wood from the forest. They pile them against the walls and set them in a blaze. Who is this who tries to check them? By St. Ives, it is the good priest who spake for them in the hall. He kneels, he prays, he implores. What, villains! Would you raise hands against those who have befriended you? Ah, the butcher has struck him. He is down. They stamp him under their feet. They tear off his gown and wave it in the air. See now how the flames lick up the walls. Are there none left to rally round us? With 100 men we might hold our own." "Oh, for my company!" cried Sir Nigel. "But where is Ford, Alleyne?" "He is foully murdered, my fair lord." "The saints receive him! May he rest in peace! But here come some at last who may give us counsel, for amid these passages it is ill to stir without a guide." As he spoke, a French squire and the Bohemian knight came rushing down the steps, the latter bleeding from a slash across his forehead. "All is lost!" he cried. "The castle is taken and on fire. The seneschal is slain, and there is naught left for us." "On the contrary," quoth Sir Nigel, "there is much left to us, for there is a very honourable contention before us, and a fair lady for whom to give our lives. There are many ways in which a man might die, but none better than this." "You can tell us, Godfrey," said Du Guesclin to the French squire. "How came these men into the castle, and what succours can we count upon? By St. Ives! if we come not quickly to some counsel we shall be burned like young rooks in a nest." The squire, a dark, slender stripling, spoke firmly and quickly, as one who was trained to swift action. "There is a passage under the earth into the castle," said he, "and through it some of the Jacks made their way, casting open the gates for the others. They have had help from within the walls, and the men at arms were heavy with wine. They must have been slain in their beds, for these devils crept from room to room with soft step and ready knife. Sir Amory the Hospitaller was struck down with an axe as he rushed before us from his sleeping chamber. Save only ourselves, I do not think that there are any left alive." "What then would you counsel?" "That we make for the keep. It is unused save in time of war, and the key hangs from my poor lord and master's belt." "There are two keys there." "It is the larger. Once there we might hold the narrow stair, and at least, as the walls are of a greater thickness, it would be longer ere they could burn them. Could we but carry the lady across the bailey all might be well with us." "Nay, the lady hath seen something of the work of war," said Tiphaine, coming forth, as white, as grave, and as unmoved as ever. "I would not be a hamper to you, my dear spouse and gallant friend. Rest assured of this, that if all else fails I have always a safeguard here," drawing a small silver hilted poniard from her bosom, "which sets me beyond the fear of these vile and blood stained wretches." "Tiphaine," cried Du Guesclin, "I have always loved you, and now, by Our Lady of Rennes, I love you more than ever. Did I not know that your hand will be as ready as your words, I would myself turn my last blow upon you ere you should fall into their hands. Lead on, Godfrey. A new golden pyx will shine in the minster of Dinan if we come safely through with it." The attention of the insurgents had been drawn away from murder to plunder, and all over the castle might be heard their cries and whoops of delight as they dragged forth the rich tapestries, the silver flagons, and the carved furniture. Down in the courtyard half clad wretches, their bare limbs all mottled with blood stains, strutted about with plumed helmets upon their heads, or with the Lady Rochefort's silken gowns girt round their loins and trailing on the ground behind them. Casks of choice wine had been rolled out from the cellars, and starving peasants squatted, goblet in hand, draining off vintage which De Rochefort had set aside for noble and royal guests. Others, with slabs of bacon and joints of dried meat upon the ends of their pikes, held them up to the blaze or tore at them ravenously with their teeth. Yet all order had not been lost amongst them, for some hundreds of the better armed stood together in a silent group, leaning upon their rude weapons and looking up at the fire, which had spread so rapidly as to involve one whole side of the castle. Already Alleyne could hear the crackling and roaring of the flames, while the air was heavy with heat and full of the pungent whiff of burning wood. CHAPTER 30